Good morning. It's now 10:36, and I would like to call this meeting to order. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Anthony Vera, and I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you today. This, in fact, is our first meeting in the Cabildo building, so I want to thank you for being part of this very special moment. I would also like to welcome the viewing audience to what is, in fact, the 26th public hearing of the Joint Select Committee on State Enterprises. The purpose of this meeting is to commence its inquiry into the operations of tourism agencies in Trinidad and Tobago and to determine their effectiveness in fulfilling your mandate. The role of the committee is firstly to examine the issues which arose based on Tourism Trinidad Limited and the Tobago Tourism Agency's written submissions to our questions. And secondly, to aid Tourism Trinidad Limited and the Tobago Tourism Agency in improving your operations, hopefully with a view to resulting in a more efficient and effective set of organizations. This meeting is being broadcast live on Parliament Channel 11, Parliament Radio 105.5 FM, and the Parliament's YouTube channel, ParlView. Viewers and listeners can participate by sending comments relating to today's engagement with the Tourism Trinidad Limited, Tobago Tourism Agency, the Ministry of Tourism, the Division of Tourism, Culture and Transportation, Tobago House of Assembly, and the Ministry of Finance Investments Division. You can send your comments and questions via email to parl101@ttparliament.org or on our Facebook page at facebook.com/ttparliament or on Twitter @ttparliament. So again, welcome all, and may I invite you to introduce yourselves.
Simone Williams, Acting Director, Research and Planning at the Ministry of Tourism.
Richard Madre, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Tourism.
Hi, good morning. Heidi Alert, Acting CEO of Tourism Trinidad.
Morning, Howard Chinley, Chairman of TTL.
Good morning, Sherma Roberts, Chairman of the Tobago Tourism Agency.
Good morning, I'm Louis Lewis, Chief Executive Officer of the Tobago Tourism Agency Limited.
Good morning. I am Selma Graham, Administrator, Division of Tourism, Culture and Transportation, Tobago House of Assembly.
Good morning. I'm Jennifer Lutchman, Acting Permanent Secretary, Investments Division, Ministry of Finance.
Good morning. I'm Junior Tuari, Acting Senior Business Analyst, Ministry of Finance.
Good morning. I am Chintamani Suku, Acting Director, Social and Economic Transformation, Investments Division.
Good morning, Renice Gray, Tobago Tourism Agency Limited, Accountant.
Good morning, Chairman, members. I'm Natasha Lamy Ramsden. I'm Manager Legal, Corporate Secretary of Tourism Trinidad Limited.
Good morning. My name is Esther Ennis, Deputy Permanent Secretary, Acting Ministry of Tourism.
Good morning. My name is Edward Lee Tang, Tourism Coordinator, Ministry of Tourism.
Thank you all. Two of our committee members, unfortunately, are not here today. They are Mrs. Critchlow Coburn and Dr. Lester Henry. But may I invite the other committee members to now introduce themselves, please.
Good morning, Foster Cummings, member.
Morning, Fazal Karim, member. Good morning. Wade Mark, member.
Morning, General Antoine, member.
Morning, Adrian Leons, member.
Thank you. May I just remind everyone that your cell phones should either be put on silent or switched off. So what I propose to do is I'm going to invite you to make some brief opening remarks. Then I will ask a few questions, and then I will open the floor to questions. So may I invite you to make a few brief opening remarks?
Good morning. So on behalf of Tourism Trinidad Limited, we appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning. If I were to sum up what this past year has meant to us, into one word, it would be momentum. And momentum meaning that it was really important for us to hire the staff and start meeting objectives. And I'm very happy to report, in terms of the meeting the objective side, two key metrics for us would be visitor arrivals, especially the stopover arrivals by air, as well as hotel occupancy. And in both of these metrics for 2019 as compared to 2018, we are increasing. So for 2019 arrivals, we increased by over 11,000 visitors, which represents a 3.1% increase from 2018 to 2019. And the hotel occupancy also increased from 59.8% in 2018 to 62.1% in 2019. And so again, that momentum and creating a positive trajectory is really what we are encouraged by, and what we are looking to continue into 2020 is to build on that strength, certainly even more. So thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Tobago Tourism Agency was established in February, as you know, 2017, and we got our instruments of appointment in July 2017. Thereabout, the director set about charting the path, understanding our mandate first of all, and we utilized the Comprehensive Development Plan of Tobago as well as the approved note from the Tobago House of Assembly to understand the remit of what we had to do. And of course, we set about our first business, setting up the administrative infrastructure, getting our human resource up and running. For example, we had to recruit our CO. And then further to that, and very importantly, we had to have a direction. And so we articulated with our stakeholders a 3-year roadmap and growth strategy that laid out our core attractors, that laid out where we want to get to and the outcomes we wanted to achieve. We also strengthened the policy infrastructure in the agency, via human resources, accounting policies, and other procedures. And we also, important to our first 2 years in office, we wanted to establish Destination Tobago. What is the personality of Tobago? And therefore, we set about establishing the brand of Tobago, unspoiled, undiscovered, untouched. Thank you. And of course, in this year, we are focusing on product development. So that is in broad how the agency has started off and where we are today.
Thank you. P.S. Madre.
Good morning again. The Ministry of Tourism appreciates the opportunity to attend this Joint Select Committee and to participate in this inquiry into the effective operations of the tourism agencies. The Ministry is responsible for guiding and fostering the development and promotion of the tourism sector. In this regard, we rely on our implementation agency, Tourism Trinidad Limited, to undertake destination marketing and promotion in respect of Trinidad. We also have oversight responsibility of the company, and we are responsible for ensuring that that company meets its mandate. Therefore, we look forward to being of assistance during the course of this inquiry and to responding to your questions.
Thank you, PS. Ms. Graham?
Thank you. The Division of Tourism, Culture and Transportation sees its roles of leadership, policy making, public education and awareness as critical to ensuring that, together with the Tobago Tourism Agency Limited, the mission of positioning Tobago as the preferred destination is achieved. Funding is also critical, but the division has not been able to meet the financial demands of the agency. I remain hopeful, however, that after this hearing, the need for increased funding specifically for the agency would have been well articulated. Therefore, we welcome the invitation to appear, and together we will endeavor to provide pertinent information that will assist this committee.
Thank you all. Ms. Alert spoke about momentum. So I think I'd like to start off in that vein. And if you would permit me, I'd like to step back a little bit, because I suspect that for many, this is the first time they're hearing about these two new entities, Tourism Trinidad Limited and Tobago Tourism Agency Limited. So I think it may be useful to see how we get to this point. In May 1995, TIDCO was established as a state enterprise via an act of parliament. And I recall that TIDCO was an amalgam of the Export Development Company, the Industrial Development Corporation, and the Trinidad and Tobago Tourism Development Authority. Under that act, all the assets, liabilities, and obligations of those three entities were vested in TIDCO. Around February 2004, it was announced that TIDCO would be scrapped and replaced by the Tourism Development Corporation, TDC. And TDC was going to be restructured and fine-tuned to focus directly on the tourism industry. And among other things, TDC was going to focus on marketing Trinidad and Tobago to its source destinations. It was going to create better domestic awareness. It was going to host events, packages, and promotions. It would be responsible for investment, product development, standards and certification, industry training, inspection, and licensing. Then, almost 10 years to the day of TIDCO's establishment, in May 2005, the Tourism Development Company Limited was established under the Companies Act. And this company was charged with the responsibility for developing all aspects of the tourism sector. In or around 2017, a decision was then taken to dissolve the Tourism Development Company Limited, and in its place, establish Trinidad Tourism Limited, Tobago Tourism Agency Limited. And this is where we now are. You are appearing before us as the latest models in a long chain of discarded and now I'm hoping a presumably improved model. I have a couple of questions before I open the floor. Do you, TTL and TTAL, have all the assets, liabilities, and obligations of the earlier incarnations? Remember, with TIDCO, TIDCO had a vesting order. Everything was put into TIDCO. TIDCO carried the mantle. I'm wondering what has happened to those previous undertakings, to your predecessors? Or are you starting fresh, clean?
Yes. I'm going to attempt to answer that question by indicating that the TDC has, is still existing whilst it is being wound up. So I can, and it's not under our ministry, it is under the Ministry of Finance. So there's a board in place and an acting CEO still in place there to wind up the operations of that company. So I'm aware that a number of legal matters and so on that do have to be addressed. In terms of some of the assets of the TDC, some of those assets have been transferred to the new company, Tourism Trinidad Limited.
Thank you.
And to the ministry.
I wonder if the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Finance can assist.
Chairman, as was alluded to, the TDC is being wound up, and a board is in place to undertake the winding up exercise at the moment.
All right, thank you. Now, Tourism Trinidad Limited was established to provide, and I'm quoting, a robust institutional structure to execute goals and objectives of the new mandate for tourism. Can you enlighten us about the new institutional structure and what makes it different from its predecessors?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Mr. Mark, how are you? I just wanted to give a brief history according to what you have said, because I was very much part of that history. In the days of the EDC, the IDC, and the TDA was amalgamated in May 1995 to form TIDCO, of which I served as a member of the board of directors. Later on, under the Manning administration, TIDCO was dissolved to form the Tourism Development Company, of which I was responsible for, serving as Minister of Tourism. In 2017, the government took a decision to split Tobago's promotion and marketing from Trinidad's. And actually, in looking at it in hindsight, it's a pretty wise decision. And the reason I say that is, if you look at the market and the arrivals from Tobago, it's very different to that of Trinidad. Tobago's arrivals are based mainly on the leisure travelers, sun, sand, and sea, whereas Trinidad arrivals, and I have to say it's larger than Tobago's arrivals, is based mainly on events such as Carnival. It's based on conventions such as the Energy Conference and other conferences that are held here, and sports tourism. So we have, since taking office in July as chairman of the TTL, we are now focusing directly on those particular areas, which is on convention tourism, sports tourism, and events. So having said that, the TTL and its board of directors formed a strategic plan based on marketing Trinidad individually, separate and apart from Tobago. And we have a one-year strategic plan, and we have now hired a firm to do a 3-year strategic plan. We're also pleased to report that since July of this year, we have seen an uptick, for whatever reasons, in arrivals to our shores. And then we could give you those figures in due course. But having said that, we are given a budget from the Ministry of Tourism to deal with specifically marketing of Trinidad, to deal with development of sites and infrastructure, as well as improving and increasing investments to our shores. There are certain investors that we've been speaking to regarding convention and conference tourism, which we can elaborate on further on in this particular hearing. So I just wanted to put that in perspective when you mentioned TIDCO, TDC, and now TTL, and what our mandate is at the present moment. I don't know if that put things into perspective.
Thank you very much, Chairman. That was very helpful. Could you expand a little, please, on the new mandate and some of the institutional structures that make these new entities different from your predecessors?
Okay, so based on our new mandate, we have, when I arrived in July, we had a total amount of staff of a total of 5 people. We have brought on managers in 4 particular areas, one in product development, a manager of investments to deal with the TDA Act and encouraging investors to come to Trinidad by outlaying the various incentives provided for under the TDA Act. We also have a person in charge of marketing, and all of these people form a structure within the organization. So now we've increased the staff to 25, total of 25, so we are now, as the acting CEO said, we're now building a momentum and we're moving that forward. We can provide the committee with the structure of the org chart for the committee if needed.
Yes, we would like to get that. Thank you. Dr. Roberts?
Thank you, Chair. You want to clarify the question that you are asking, please?
Well, I'm interested in hearing something of your mandate, your institutional structure.
Thank you. So our mandate is to lead the redevelopment of Tobago and position tourism as a growth strategy or growth tool for socio-economic development, not excluding the enhancement of the lives of residents. So our approach is holistic. We want economic sustainability, we want environmental sustainability, we want social sustainability. How do we get there was one of the first questions we had to ask. So we met with well, first of all, we looked at the documents that existed because we wanted to know, as you are alluding, what went before, and therefore, what can we do differently, and would we be repeating the same successes or indeed mistakes? So we set about looking at what was there, and the terms of reference from the consultants laid out that the remit of the agency is marketing, product development, some foreign direct investment, certainly research, building capacity among our stakeholders, and some levels of resident awareness. So that's broadly what we knew that we had to do. So together with our stakeholders, we looked at crafting, or we crafted a 3-year roadmap and growth strategy that went 2018 to 2021. What essentially that is putting to our stakeholders and ourselves an ambition. What do we want to achieve? So our core attractors we identified, because as the chair said, you can't go after every market. So we determined that our market would be cultural heritage, wellness, romance, eco, and dive. Where do we find those persons? In certain source markets. Our strongest source market is the UK, then we have Scandinavia, Germany, Canada, very recently, and then Trinidad. Our domestic market cannot be underestimated. And the other question is marketing to those persons. So we developed a branding, because in our source markets, Tobago, we weren't sure who Destination Tobago was. So we went about creating this branding exercise that says this is who Tobago is, and I would say it is a fantastic brand. It is a revolutionary brand. It is a brand that I have never seen globally, because it is able to take the head montage and transform it to all the different markets, whether it's romance, whether it's niche, and so on. We wanted to grow our arrivals by 25% between 2018, 2019, 55%, and 90%. Institutionally, we ensured that we had the proper human resources in place. So we recruited and attracted a formidable, I would say, CEO with an interesting mix of talent and skill, understanding public sector, private sector intersectionality. And we also recruited in 2018 our senior management team. The Division of Tourism was very generous in giving us 2 very competent tourism officers, because building an organization from scratch, it can be intimidating as much as it could be exciting. So we needed some guidance in terms of how does a THA work and how do we navigate successfully through that entire system. So we had our senior management team. We developed our policy infrastructure. We ring-fenced, I would say, our organization, and then we took our branding to the world, reintroduced Destination Tobago, and now we are looking at the whole notion of building a green product. Of course, as the administrator has pointed out, funding continues to be intermittent and sporadic, but and so we hope that after this hearing, we would have made a strong case for greater funding, because I think we are a responsible agency in the way we manage our finances. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. The floor is now open to members. I believe Member Mark had some questions.
Yes, thank you. Let me offer my welcome to all of you. First of all, Mr. Chinley, Howard, my good friend, let me just ask something here. Did you indicate when the cabinet took the decision to establish Tourism Trinidad Limited and the Tobago Tourism Agency? Is there a date that you are aware of, a year when that decision was taken?
Yes, Member Chairman. Yeah, it was taken in March 2017.
March 2017, okay. Thank you. I would like to ask Dr. Roberts a few questions and help me in clarifying. We are seeing in your submission something called the Tourism or Tobago Tourism Agency. And we are seeing in the THA's note that they approved the Tobago Tourism Authority. I just would like you to clear the air for us. Is there a conceptual difference, or is that those names are used interchangeably? I'm not too sure. So if you could guide us in clarifying this.
That's a quite interesting question, because I did see that difference as well. And I do think that there's a philosophical difference, because authority to me always seems to suggest an actor where, how do I say it? It always seems to suggest that you are being driven by something else. An agency to me always suggests that there is more action coming from within the bowels of the organization, and therefore it has its own momentum, to use a word that has been used this morning, and its own ability to fight through whatever barriers. So there has been a change in the wording. I'm not sure if it has been intentional, but it is what has certainly evolved. But it was passed as it was approved by Minute 69 February, incorporated in April 2017, and instruments of appointment obtained by the Board of Directors in July 2017.
Well, could you indicate very clearly, are we talking about the Tobago Tourism Agency, or are we talking about the Tobago Tourism Authority? What is the name of the organization that is driving tourism in Tobago?
The entity that has been incorporated is Tobago Tourism Agency. And therefore, it is the agency that is driving the redevelopment of tourism.
So there's no such organization by the name of Tobago Tourism Authority, as far as you are aware?
As far as I'm aware.
I would like to ask a further question. Is this agency a statutory authority, or is it a private limited liability company? Can you clear the air for this committee?
So we're a private limited liability company.
So it's a private limited liability company.
Yes, sir.
Right, okay. Could you tell us who are the shareholders? Who are the shareholders of this company?
The Tobago House of Assembly is the sole shareholder of the Tobago Tourism Agency.
All right. Can you also clarify for us how much revenue or monies of finance would have been allocated to the Tobago Tourism Agency since its establishment? And if you can tell us on a yearly basis, you know, you started in July of 2017 when instruments would have been handed out. What was the budget for 2017? The budget for 2018? The budget for 2019? And the budget for 2020? Can you provide us with that information?
Thank you, sir. For 2017-2018, the allocation was 1 million. We received 13.6 from the division. 2018-2019, the agency made a request of 141 million. We received 20 million. 2019-2020, we made a request for 130 million. That's the Tobago House of Assembly. We received 20 million, which makes the point that there is a big gap between our ambition and the financing of our projects.
Yeah, I agree with you. Could you tell us, even in the face of the amounts which could be improved in order to achieve your mandate, can you explain to this committee why, over the period outlined, the agency, the Tobago Agency, has not been able to establish an audit committee of the board? That's one. Why you have not hired an external auditor? And the third area, why the agency has not established an internal audit unit, given the fact that you have been allocated since 2017-18, 40, 50, 54 million taxpayers' dollars. So could you share with us why these things have not taken place thus far?
Chair, when we were given a mandate for the agency, I think what was important, we had to prioritize what was important for the functioning, for the takeoff, for the revitalization of Tobago. And certainly in our conversations on the board, at our discussions, we felt that really getting the branding and the name of Tobago established in a source market was most important. Because we understand the competition. The competition for tourism market share is fierce. And if you are not known, if you're not discoverable, you know, someone else will eat your supper. We saw other similar destinations like ours in the Caribbean, in the Pacific, that has a similar product, really gaining a lot of market share. So for us, it was really stabilizing the tourism industry in Tobago, ensuring that airlift was maintained, that Virgin, that British Airways did not pull out, ensuring that hotels remain open, ensuring that guest houses, you know, could function. And so we felt that while we are working at the mechanism of our internal financial governance, maybe at a slower pace, what was priority was really marketing, getting the awareness of Destination Tobago out. Having said that, we were not completely blind by the fact that we had to build our financial architecture within the organization by having procurement policies, by having credit card policies, by having different types of financial policies. With respect to the internal auditor in particular, RFPs have been sent out. There has been a short list that will come to the Board of Directors in a February meeting for us to choose an external auditing firm. So it was a matter of the delicate balance, the delicate dance with how do we utilize these limited resources that were sporadic, that were intermittent, to the best of our ability. So we are not unaware that we have been less aggressive as far as the internal auditing is concerned, but we have put plans in place in terms of having an RFP, shortlisting an external auditing firm. When that firm has been found, we will establish an internal subcommittee of the board because there's no point in having an internal subcommittee when there was no external or internal auditor.
Dr. Roberts, I want to tell you, with the greatest respect, public accountability is extremely serious business, and you cannot be allocated over $54 million over this period that we have been looking at. And there is no urgency, from what I'm seeing here, in having proper accountability. No internal audit function, no external auditor being employed. This is an agency that is going forward, but there's no systems of accountability for public monies. That is inexcusable. And I would like to ask the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Tourism whether you have any oversight of the Tobago agency, or whether it is simply the Division of Tourism that has that responsibility. And I would like to ask, after you answer, the Ministry of Finance, Investments Division, because this is 2 years and 7 months and a few days, and there is no financial audited statements coming out of the Tobago agency for 17, 18, 19. I would like to know what is the position of these agencies, the Ministry of Tourism, firstly, the Tobago Division, THA, as well as the Ministry of Investment, Finance, Investment Division. Mr. Chairman, when I'm through, I have a slew of questions, but I know other members will want to speak. So I will return to Tobago because I need to get a number of areas clarified on this matter. So firstly, the permanent secretary, and then we follow THA, and then we go to the investment division. Clear for the public of TNT what is going on with this agency in Tobago with public money and no accountability.
I want to say firstly that I do recognize that there would be challenges in any startup operation. We would have been working closely with the Tourism Trinidad Limited in respect of its own reporting requirements and its and the organizational arrangements that it would have needed to put in place. With respect to the Tobago tourism agency. However, the cabinet, when it made its earlier decisions, had indicated that the Tobago House of Assembly would be responsible for the oversight of the Tobago agency. And therefore, as I understand it, the funding for that agency comes through the division, the THA, and specifically the Division of Tourism in Tobago.
Well, can I ask Mrs. Graham?
Okay, the Tobago House of Assembly, the Division of Tourism, Culture and Transportation, has oversight over the Tobago Tourism Agency Limited. And the division is aware that the agency has not submitted the audited financial statement. However, every month, the agency submits financial statements to the division, and at the end of the tenure, every year, at the end of the year, they would submit financial statements also to the division. But we have been working with the agency so as to ensure that as soon as it is possible, that they will as soon as they can get the funding and get all the arrangements in place to submit the audited financial statement.
Ministry of Finance Investments Division.
The Investment Division does not monitor the Tobago Tourism Agency Limited because that's under the remit of the THA. The Investment Division monitors Tourism Trinidad Limited. And I have to say they have been compliant in most respects in that they have up-to-date financial statements, and I believe they have an internal auditor.
Mr. Chairman, before I close temporarily, this is a very serious matter. Ministry of Tourism not responsible. Ministry of Finance not responsible. THA is responsible. THA has fallen down on the job insofar as carrying out its responsibility to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and in Tobago in particular. And therefore, Mr. Chairman, I am suggesting that this committee may have to take a decision to bring somebody higher up in the THA so that we can have greater accountability. This cannot continue, Mr. Chairman.
As Member Mark was speaking, I'm just curious, Ms. Graham, what's the position with the State Enterprises Performance Monitoring Manual? Tobago Tourism Agency Limited, I believe, falls under the purview of a state enterprise and is obliged to follow the best practices outlined here. Do you apply the manual when auditing them or overseeing their activities? Do they apply the manual in their own self-governance?
The question again.
What you have described seems to be a lot of latitude to Tobago Tourism Agency Limited in getting their act together depending on the availability of funds. But what I'm suggesting is, from the time they were incorporated and became a state enterprise, whether it's Trinidad or Tobago, they're supposed to be following the practices outlined in the State Enterprises Performance Monitoring Manual. And my question is that a factor in your oversight? And I would like to hear whether it's a factor in self-governance.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the State Enterprises Monitoring Manual has informed all the procedures that the Tobago Tourism Agency undertake. Our procurement policy informed by it, all our financial procedures have been informed by the State Enterprises Monitoring Manual. And I do agree with the member that, you know, we need to ensure that the internal auditing function, because it is government's money that we are spending. Every board meeting, a presentation, financial statement comes to the board for review, for investigation, for questioning, for interrogation, and every quarter, our accountant presents to the board of directors what is happening vis-a-vis the finances of the agency, and we ask questions based on the spending. So, you know, there is financial oversight, responsibility, accountability of the Tobago Tourism Agency. There is not a wild spending of the state's finances.
No, but I thank you for that. But on just the audit committee, it says every state enterprise is required to appoint an audit committee. It doesn't say when funds are available. That's a requirement. So we're just drawing to your attention that there seems to be something lacking there, and perhaps room for improvement. Member Karam, I believe you had some questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me add my welcome to all of you. Before I get into my substantive question, I just want to take a line from Senator Mark. With respect to the Tobago Tourism Agency Limited, and in terms of the adherence to the State Enterprises Performance Manual, who will you report to in the context of how you're operating, that will be able to tell us that there has been adherence or significant non-adherence to that performance manual?
Our reporting would be to the Division of Tourism, Culture and Transportation.
Okay, so my follow-up question is, will the person who is representing that division, can you say whether there has been adherence to or not sufficient adherence to the State Enterprises Performance Manual?
I would say that there has been adherence to the state enterprise.
Could you give us some examples of that adherence?
Okay, with respect to the adherence to the procurement activities, I would say that they have been complying with that.
Is there an adherence policy?
If there's?
That they have been compliant, but is there an adherence policy?
Yes.
And it is followed from the manual?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, you could go ahead.
Also, there's the HR policy. As far as I know, they have been adhering to HR policy.
Those two that you
Those two are the
could come to mind now?
that could come to mind.
Okay. Can you tell us whether in terms of the increase in visitor arrivals or repeat, or in terms of maximizing the expenditure, do you pay any airline, do you subsidize any seats on any airline that connect to Tobago or transport in and out of Tobago?
Okay, I'll ask the CEO to respond to that.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman. In the budget allocation for the management of tourism, there is a provision of $40 million annually that is used for airlift subsidization. With the greatest respect to the committee, I'm anticipating a requirement of detail on that allocation. And for two reasons. One, in the individual contracts with the airlines, there is a clause of confidentiality. But we recognize that that confidentiality does not extend to this body. And secondly, it would erode our negotiating status if one company was aware of the details of interaction with another. So we would crave for your indulgence if we can provide that information in writing or in camera, if you would be so generous with us.
Okay.
Just on that point, Chief Executive Director, please be assured that not everything that is said in these committee hearings is necessarily made public. We do appreciate that state enterprises operate in a very competitive environment and that there are non-disclosure agreements and that there is a need for confidentiality. But when certain information is requested, we can keep that private and confidential to us, but we do have oversight, and sometimes we would like to get all the information. I'm not saying that we're pressing for it now, but just to assure you of that.
Okay, and Mr. Chairman, I was only concerned because I'm aware that it is being broadcast live, but we are very willing to provide that information.
Let me ask a question that is non-confidential. If you have an allocation of 40 million, as you indicated, could you give us for the last 3-4 years, for example, or your tenure? I think you came into being in 2017. So for the last 3 or 2 years, how much money has been expended in terms of airlift subsidy?
Well, for you, Mr. Chairman, that fund has been a rolling fund on an annual basis, and it has been exhausted every year. Sometimes, based on the financial cycle, the government's fiscal year, it runs over. So, for instance, in 1 year, we would have utilized 37 million, but just because of the cyclical payments, it would take us to the next period. So it has always been exhausted.
2-year period, how much would you say you would have expended?
Well, I can confidently say that the $80 million has been expended.
Okay, so that's what I'm getting at, 80 million in 2 years for airlift subsidy. Do you have any, in terms of, I suppose this could be answered by anyone, and particularly with respect to the THA responsibility, tourism, or the Tobago Tourism Agency, do you have any instances of investigation of any type or litigation for any misuse or misappropriation of funds of any type?
Mr. Chairman, let me explain how the system has been managed. From the inception of the agency, in terms of its operations, and that started on, I would say, on the 1st of November, 2017. The funding for airlift subsidization or airlift management has been held within the Division of Tourism, but the agency has been responsible for the negotiations. As it exists, and I'm talking from this period, November 2017 up till now, there are none. But I'm also aware that there was an incident or an issue prior to 2017, November 2017, which I suspect is where your question is being directed. But in terms of the responsibility of the agency, we were outside of that negotiation or transactions. And so therefore, from our perspective, we are not aware of anything subsequent, well, from since 2017.
Well, in that case, the question could be directed to THA. Could you tell us about that instance or instances and give us some details without compromising the integrity of the information?
Well, as far as I am aware, I know that the investigations continuing. The matter is with the Trinidad and Tobago police. But I cannot give I don't have any other information.
Information that may have been in the public domain about the amount of money, the sums of money. I'm really asking this question in the context of the statements that were made before in terms of budgetary allocations, which fell way short of the amount that was requested. And therefore, as a State Enterprises Committee, we'll want to see and to find out how are these monies being effectively utilized. And if so, if people have to be brought to an account. So if you could tell us, or if you could elucidate the committee, whether there are any instances, what is the quantum of money we're talking about? Without having indicated to compromise the investigation, but to tell us what is that instance and what is the amount.
I know the amount was $8 million. $8 million.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to go on to the substantive question I wanted to ask. I note that the Trinidad and Tobago, in Trinidad and Tobago tourism, both Trinidad and Tobago, and I'm going to read it from here, that there is the Ministry of Tourism, I should say, maybe more specific, is seeking to establish a Trinidad and Tobago Tourism Regulatory and Licensing Authority. Might you be able to give us a sense as to what's the status of that and who will be regulated and licensed, and with which model are you going to be patterning this organization, this association along?
Remember, in any industry and in any economy, regulations can be seen to be important to the achievement of national objectives. And those regulations should be consistent with public policy. Within the context of the tourism industry, we have recognized that there are some challenges with respect to having an unregulated industry. For example, we are unable to define the number of tourism service providers because there are a whole range of persons who are arguably involved in the tourism industry, and to monitor the quality of the services offered by these providers. The ministry in 2017 engaged a consultant to assist us in establishing the path forward for the regulatory authority. A draft policy document was prepared, but the policy document was deemed to be needed additional work. We subsequently met with the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards, who advised that before we go into a full-blown regulatory authority, we should conduct what they deemed to be a regulatory impact assessment. That is, what would be the implications for any regulation, choose any one regulation, on the state of the industry. Currently, during the course of this year, the ministry will be assessing what exactly that means, because we did not have a lot of detail as to how to go about going out for such a consultancy. We will be assessing what that means, and sometime during the course of the year, once we've defined that, we will put up a project for the next fiscal year for that RIA to be done.
Yes, are you saying that there, as we speak, there are no operating standards within the sector and the industry? Because if you're saying that you are going to have a regulatory industry, I will ask you the question. Who is going to be certifying these people? Is it the authority? Who are those participants? Is it, I don't want to tell you who they could be. You should know them, but it is going to be, I'll just give you an example. Will it be hotels? Will it be travel agents? Will it be service providers? Will it be taxi drivers? Will it be tour guides? B&B, all of these. And if you are going into a strategic plan, I'm sure you have a strategic plan now, don't you?
We have a draft strategic plan.
And that draft did not consider anything with respect, did it consider anything with respect to this authority?
Yeah, I believe that it predated, I'm being told that it did not include those aspects. However, the ministry is in fact engaged in other activities that will lead to a new strategic plan next year, including policy discussions, so that it is likely that that will be taken up. In the interim, we, through the TTL, and perhaps the TTL could speak a little bit more about that, they will be implementing certification standards, which would be not regulated, not enforceable, but still, nevertheless, it would be standards that could be applied to various sectors of that, segments of that sector. So perhaps...
If I can jump into that end. So even while the regulation is set up, TTBS, the Bureau of Standards, does have tourism standards that are already proclaimed and in place. And that covers both accommodation, it covers transport operators, It covers sites and attractions. So there's a number of standards that are already proclaimed and in place by the TTBS. As PS was just alluding to, we are going to be launching, together with TTBS, a certification program. Now, it is voluntary, which is the distinction to be made between what was described there. So it is voluntary at this point, but it will be a way to offer the industry and to provide that benchmark that says that these standards have been attained. And so it will be a joint collaboration between TTBS and us in terms of TTL, and the Tobago would also have their own agreement in place with TTBS. But those standards are in place, and we are working to provide the certification, which is really allowing us some time until the regulatory authority is established.
The TTBS, are you aware of any other agency that produce these standards in terms of quality assurance mechanisms or accreditation of these persons and participants in the sector? Because what we want to do really is to lift the quality of delivery of the tourism product, be it in Trinidad or Tobago. Are you aware of any other agency?
Thankfully, that one central repository, because to me, if you had different agencies producing different standards, it would create confusion in the marketplace. But what I will say, for TTBS, they have an extremely rigorous process that whenever those standards are being established, and they work with international bodies as well as regional bodies, and do a very thorough stakeholder engagement throughout the process, whenever they are establishing those standards. And those are at a country level, so that's not some for Trinidad and some for Tobago. And if those standards are adhered to, I think what the concern that you are raising in terms of the visitor experience and what is the actual site and attraction, is it handicap accessible, and those types of considerations, they are all catered for in the standards currently. And they are updated regularly, again, by the TTBS, because they would be the kind of, again, central place that those come out of.
Okay, let me just conclude by just making a suggestion. You may wish to consider the National Training Agency, which have developed standards in the tourism and hospitality sector for a number of years now, which in fact are certified and approved by the ACTT as the overarching body. Once you are talking certification, even if it is the TTBS, it must be adhered to by the Accreditation Council of Trinidad and Tobago. And one of the things that you will find very useful in terms of the National Training Agency is they can award the CVQ, the Caribbean Vocational Qualification, which has marketability and portability in the CARICOM, but also you will have collaboration from other CARICOM stakeholder countries. I want to also ask whether, you did say that it's going to be voluntary, but do you have any desire in the future to make it mandatory? Because if you don't, then what you will have is like you will have a situation where you have licensed taxis and other unlicensed taxis. And then there is a risk to the persons who will visit, the visitor arrival, because once you have a negative impact on your tourism sector, it affects the entire economy. Will you have any consideration in the future to making this mandatory over a period of time?
Sure. So let me actually treat with both points that you raised. I appreciate you bringing up NTA. We actually did have a meeting, not knowing this question would come up, but we had a meeting with NTA last week, actually, because it was a collaboration talking about, aside from just tourism standards, but how can you help with, because we also provide some training and capacity building for some of the frontline workers in the tourism sector, and they would have offered some of the courses, some of the training providers. So we do have an ongoing and active conversation happening with the NTA, so I appreciate you highlighting that as well. And with regards to making it mandatory, so that I would defer back to PS's response. So that agency that is looking at being set up is what would allow for the mandatory enforcement. So this is really the voluntary certification program we recognize is, I don't want to call it just stopgap, but it's kind of an interim measure until we can get the mandatory enforcement agency in place.
Thank you. Member Cummings.
Chairman, my question is for the Tobago Tourism Agency. You have outlined some of the functions of the agency, I know that most of the questions posed to you this morning dealt with your auditing function and accounting, but I want to ask you now, what would you highlight to this committee as some of the successes over the period of the agency, bearing in mind the functions that you've outlined?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman. I think in the very short life of the agency, we have a few what we consider as milestones that we've been able to achieve. Given the mandate of the agency, which was to resuscitate tourism, I think the first milestone for us, and our chairman alluded to it, was establishing a brand. And it was not just establishing a brand to come up with a graphic. It was presenting an imagery that translated what is Tobago to the travel trade. Because one of the things that we found out is that there was a bit of ambiguity in terms of what is Tobago. And because a sales interaction is very short, a very short interval for you to engage a potential traveler, we had to find something that would have allowed us to be able to create that impression. So establishing that brand was a key milestone. I think also another important strategy was developing the roadmap that clearly articulated what are our metrics, where we want to go, and how are we going to get there. And in the public discussion, there is often reference to visitor flows, but we have as a very keen interest internally. It's not just the volume of arrivals, but getting quality. So how do we increase the on-island expenditure? And that is embedded in our strategy. So we report on visitor flows, but we also pay very close attention to how do we get those arrivals that give us a greater economic bang. And let me put that into perspective. By focusing on the reason to visit, we invigorate various sections within the tourism sector. So while we may get 10 more people, but you may get 10 more people who are into birding or into diving. And if they are into diving, they have a greater interest and participation in spending on diving and various dives that are available on the island. So that's another key metric. For us, we wanted to get out of the clutter. We recognize that we are small and we have some significant challenges. And we took the great risk, but with confidence, that we could put up our brand against world-class competition. And we did place second, only edged out by greater revenue, greater resources, I would imagine, in the case of, I think it was New Zealand, but we outdid Incredible India. And if you look at what Incredible India stands for in terms of tourism promotion, they are in places where we could never hope to be. But our small size was where our strength actually lied in terms of what transformational potential and how it would resonate. A number of people are not aware, in the space of about 3 months, we were able to create 70 million impressions of Tobago in a very short space of time. And that is because we had done extensive research and we knew exactly who was looking at Tobago and where to find them. Our challenge has been, with that recognition, how do we translate that into visits? And we'll get to that at some point in time. We are also encouraged by the fact that we've been able to stem the tide. We had been on a 5-year continuous decline. And for 2019, while we boast of 8.2% increase in the direct stayover arrivals, we are also mindful of the fact that there's a 50% increase in arrivals coming by the ferry and a 20% increase in arrivals coming by air. And we have a 5% increase in arrivals coming by yachts. The cruise sector has remained a challenge, and the problems to address that lay outside the purview of the agency, but it also speaks to the dynamic nature of tourism. We need to collaborate. How do we get a better port facility? How do we get a better airport? How do we create duty-free shopping experiences? How do we create a better sense of arrival? How do we ensure that the country goes green and encourage people to avoid green single-use plastics and all of those things that impact on our ability to market the destination? But of course, these are things that we will be looking at. Another important challenge for us, I think it's a major achievement, is that we have had the tourism accommodation upgrade program. That was developed and an assessment was done, and it was determined that 115 properties were in need of upgrade. The program went through 2 iterations, and there was only 1 company that accessed it. In the short space, we put some significant effort behind it, and now we can report that we have 22 companies that are actively engaged in upgrading their properties. There's a recognition of the potential in tourism. I'm hearing anecdotal feedback from some of the operators, reporting that this has been, and of course in hushed tones as well, they've had the best winter so far. So we are seeing that transformation taking place. It hasn't been easy, but it has caused us, but we have put persistent effort behind it, and we see the promise. And I think it's coming. It will take a little time. Unfortunately, it's not like going to buy a can of milk at a supermarket. It takes continuous effort, and it takes a bit of time and persistence, but we are all, get towards it. One other achievement that we can talk about is that Tobago has all of our international flights are shared. And if the growth that we have seen, we've moved from a very small percentage of those flights, edging closer and closer to half. That is a quiet revolution, transparent, and it's all because we've been able to get that marketing and make it more effective. The alignment that we have an entry into the Canadian market is another star performer for us. We've seen our arrivals balloon out of Canada in particular, and it speaks to the strategy of aligning a tour operator with a hotel property with an airline. And in a short space of time, I don't want to quote a percentage because it's a very large number, but we've moved from less than 1,000 to 2,000 arrivals. That airline is flying. In December, it flew at 94%, and in January at 96% load factor, and there were a number of times when it was 100% full. So it shows that there's tremendous potential as long as we can continue to strike those allegiances and those alignments in our marketing strategy. I can also boast that we have been able to find ways within which we can market Tobago that did not necessarily cause additional outlay, but we've been able to use, for instance, we struck an alignment with the National Geographic Explorer, and they have created what we call a content hub, which now we have been able to push onto other places where we promote Tobago that serves as a feed. And it's all about making the visibility viral and attractive, and now it's our responsibility to ensure that the marketing message delivers, the product delivers on the marketing message. And I think these are some of the successes, not exhausted, but some of the successes that we've been able to achieve in a very short space of time.
Thank you very much for that response. Let me ask additionally, in terms of the local market, what have been some of your efforts in increasing visitor arrival from Trinidad?
In 2018, we developed a program called Back to Tobago. We recognized that the domestic market was very important for Tobago, domestic market meaning Trinidad. There is no other island in the Caribbean that has that great fortune, and at the same time, it has some implications. When a number of islands went through that economic crisis, in the world economic crisis in the early 2000s, Tobago had the luxury of a resident population of 1 million people within 15 minutes away. And there's a lot of attention that has been focused on that. With the challenges on the sea bridge and the air bridge, we saw those numbers dwindle significantly. We've launched a program that focuses on Back to Tobago, recognizing that we are open, we are available, and we are inviting residents of Trinidad to visit Tobago. We are also working very quietly with a number of the travel agents within Trinidad, because what has been happening is that every other island up the chain has recognized the potential for Trinidad as a regional market, and they are marketing within Carnival, escape Carnival and come to us. They are marketing their events, their jazz festivals and other carnivals. And so we are working with those influencers, those people who are assisting people who are desirous of a vacation to see Tobago as an option. So that's, and I think, is part of the reason why we've seen a 50% increase in arrivals. And of course, there's also the bandwagon effect. With the international promotions that we've been doing, people are recognizing that we have a quality product, and they are looking at Tobago in ways that they had not seen it before. So see it for soft adventure, see it for romance and relaxation, wellness, and all the other things that we offer. And I think that these are some of the actions that we've taken to ensure that we attract an important domestic market.
In terms of other destinations in the region, how would you compare the performance of Tobago in relation to these other destinations? And what would you say Tobago needs to do to, if the answer is that we need to come up to par, what would you say is required to achieve that?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. We have identified through study who our competitors are. They are Antigua, Barbados, St. Lucia, Dominica, and Grenada. These are the countries that go head-to-head with us in terms of the quality of the product. And when we look at their shares of arrivals from international markets into this region, the numbers are large. In the case of Antigua, they attract 16%, Barbados 43%, St. Lucia 25%, Dominica 5%, and Grenada 9%. We are focusing on what our strengths are and going head-to-head with those markets. But for us to be successful, one, we have to have the right level of funding, and our chair alluded to the fact that there's a gap between the ambition and the resource allocation. Not only must we have the right level of funding, but the consistency. Tourism operates in very well-managed cyclical rotations. So there's a window of bookings that takes place between January 1st and January 15th. There's one that takes place just after Thanksgiving. There's one that takes place just before Christmas. There's another one that takes place in February. And once you miss those seasons or cycles, you're out of the game. And as a responsible agency, we are ensuring that we don't make commitments beyond our resource allocation. So the timing of those resources is very key and important for us to be engaged. And the unique thing about tourism is that once you remove your foot off the accelerator, somebody else eats your dinner. So what we need is a proper level of funding. We need a consistent level of funding. And then there is a need for collaboration across various sectors of the economy. The Tobago Tourism Agency does not control the assets of the airport, but the airport is our first point of arrival, is our last impression. The seaport, our cruise arrivals, if we look at what competing destinations within equidistance from major source markets are doing, you look at Aruba, there are 600,000 passengers, cruise passengers going to Aruba. If you look at Curacao, they have an additional 600,000, but our numbers are 60,000, 30,000. We are totally unachieving within that environment. But what makes the difference is the port reception facilities, the depth of the port. Can it accommodate the larger vessels? Can we accommodate 2 vessels? Some of those ports accommodate 5 and 6. It's not because we don't have the exact or even better product offerings. We don't have the infrastructure to accommodate growth. So we need to collaborate beyond the operations of the agency and get into those other dynamics. Then foreign direct investment is a critical factor inhibiting our growth and development. And we can look at it from several perspectives. It does not necessarily have to be foreign, but if you look at the quality of the accommodation plans that are happening, and some countries up the chain are doing some interesting things to attract investment. They go as far as selling passports, and those are invested into infrastructure, and they're inviting brands to manage. And you're seeing their visitor arrivals increasing. So everybody's talking about double-digit growth, and we are crawling along where we have the potential to attract just as much. So the investment climate, and it's not just investment by providing incentives, but it has to be active. So we have to pursue the investments that we are looking for. and to pursue the investments that we're looking for, we have to know where they're going. So it speaks to the development of a spatial development plan. What are you looking for? Do we just want volume or do we want quality? Where are they going to be located? And all of those factors lie outside of the purview of the agency, but it significantly impact our ability to grow within the mandate that we are given. So that's, in a nutshell, is some of the things that we need to look at.
Just one, I'd just like to find out, is this the first opportunity that the TTL and the TTAL had to sit together on a table, or do you have some level of cooperation and discussion in terms of your efforts? I know you're targeting different markets, but do you all talk?
We have some common problems, and just in the unlikely event that that topic does not come up, there is one big one that I really want us to address, is the ability for us to measure what we are doing. We have 2 ports of entry. There is no reporting taking place on the air bridge or the sea bridge. So somebody comes from Canada, lands in Trinidad, and comes across to Tobago, which is their final destination, intended destination. We have no way of knowing that. Somebody who goes from the US goes to Trinidad, but discovers there's a Tobago just across and comes across, there's no way of doing that because there's no reporting requirement. However, that information exists, is the willingness to pull it out. So if it exists at immigration, because you must make a declaration, and if there is sensitive information, as far as I understand IT, it's about deselecting the sensitive areas and give us the rest of the data. Because I hate to have to go and speak to an airline and depend on them to tell me how many people are coming to us when we have a reporting requirement. So we should know just as well. And it makes a very important difference that I know the passengers coming, how long they are coming, why they are coming, what they age, and because all of those factors are important for influencing them. So if there is one thing that we want to ensure coming out of this committee is to let the immigration department give us that important information so that we can think. Because that 8.2%, I am sure, is underestimated.
Thank you very much for that, Brigadier.
Good morning and welcome. TTAL has answered the question that I was asking, so I'll direct it to the other agencies. My inquiry is into coordination and synchronization, exactly what came up there. So I'm asking, what has the ministry, THA, done to coordinate the activities of the TTL and the TTAL with respect to tourism development in Trinidad and Tobago? And can the Ministry of Tourism, THA, state what areas in tourism that both the TTL and the TTAL are synchronized in their activities, and what areas there are differences in tourism development? And the example I was giving is what you speak about. Somebody comes to Trinidad and Tobago, which is one destination, one country, but 2 destinations, for event or conference. But after he travels to Tobago for recreation, diving, or whatever the case may be. And the question is, how is this recorded? What about data tracking in terms of, is it recorded as one international visit to Trinidad and Tobago, or is it recorded as an international visit and a domestic visit to Tobago, or is it recorded as 2 international visits? How is the data determined? Because this would impact in all sorts of areas in terms of visits and so forth. So is there any committee between these all these separate bodies, including the Ministry of Finance, to coordinate the activities of tourism development in Trinidad and Tobago?
All right, I'll respond briefly to the question regarding coordination, and start by noting that TTL in particular has been mobilizing its resources and ramping up its recruitment and so over the past few months. So they now have in place most of their key managers and so I think that we can now take it to the next level. We have started discussions with the TTA as well as the TTL with respect to a possible memorandum of understanding between all parties. That MOU will focus on a number of issues, and just to give some examples, joint marketing initiatives, marketing, investment, and product development, possible joint attendance at conferences and meetings, and the sharing of costs. We also propose that there be regular meetings, even though there have been ad hoc discussions. We want to ensure that there's more structure to that going forward during the course of this year. So we will be focused on implementing that project during the next few months.
And to touch on the issue of data capture, which I think I agree is very near and dear to our hearts as well, because if you have to measure the effectiveness, and arrivals is not the only, but it is an extremely important measure that has to be captured accurately. That is something that we need to come up with better solutions for. So to answer your question in terms of if somebody comes to both Trinidad or Tobago, Trinidad and Tobago, it is actually captured at where they land. So if they land in Tobago and they come to Trinidad afterwards, that is captured as a Tobago arrival. And similarly, as Mr. Lewis would have described his challenge in terms of if they arrive in Trinidad and spend a day or two, or they go to Tobago, that is captured as a Trinidad arrival. So we do have, even when whenever you think about the regional reporting, we report as a country. And so the country numbers in terms of Trinidad and Tobago arrivals is correct. You know, it's not double counted, you know, as two, and whenever you go forth. However, the one challenge that I would add that we are actively working with immigration to address is currently anybody that travels on their Trini passport, so the diaspora, is not actually counted as an arrival right now. So I would actually say that we are underreporting both for Trinidad as well as Tobago, because, and even whenever you look again at the publications that CTO puts out, Trinidad and Tobago are the only country that count their arrivals based on nationality. And so whenever we go through the different filters, anybody that travels on their Trini passport is not counted towards visitor arrivals like every other destination in the Caribbean. So that's something that we are aware of, the challenge. Again, we have met with immigration on a couple different occasions to try and come up with a solution. Part of the challenge and the balance that they have to keep is you don't want to ask for too much information from the officers that are checking in people, because the more information that you ask for, the longer the process takes to clear. So we understand that it's a balance between what we need from our side, as well as making sure that nothing is compromised on the visitor experience whenever you're actually walking through the airport. So we are looking for solutions to do that, but we also recognize, and I would echo what Mr. Lewis brought up in terms of wanting to find more and better solutions to accurately capture who is coming in from a tourism perspective, why they're coming in, where they're visiting, and those types of things.
Mr. Lewis, you wish to add anything further?
No, I agree with everything. That's the only thing I'd like to add.
Yes. How will Trinidad approach this? Would we have one team, or do we have two separate packages, Tobago response and a Trinidad response? How would we approach this in the future?
Okay, so I will say, and PS alluded to this in terms of our team really beginning to ramp up the operations. And so as we move forward, now that our team has that, to use the earlier word of momentum going, the idea is that whenever you have the expos that represent both Trinidad and Tobago, we would go as one, because that's the efficient and the effective use of taxpayers' money. You don't want to have two booths and two separate things. So there has to be an avenue for collaboration as a country and not just the individual destinations. But there are times that just Trinidad may go to one. So for example, we would have attended a large business kind of buyers meeting in Las Vegas last year, which would have been purely for driving the business and conferencing type of tourism. That may be one that we go to as Trinidad alone. And if there's one, respectively, for Tobago that as their markets were mentioned, if they have one that's for honeymoon and weddings, they may go there with purely the Tobago brand and the Tobago representing. And that's part of the benefit of creating that distinction, as our chairman mentioned earlier. So there's times that we may go separately, but where we go together or where we're both going to the same conference, it absolutely makes sense for us to go as one country. And we will find the avenues once we're identifying those conferences. We'll make sure to make that happen as well.
Any response from TTL?
For you, Mr. Chair, I have a slight refinement to the joint representation. I think we have to strive to ensure that the country, Trinidad and Tobago, is represented. But through the great wisdom that separated the marketing thrusts, it identified that they are two different products. And I think we have to share the same space, but we must preserve the separate branding. And that is the distinction I'd like. So where, for instance, there are some major international shows like the World Travel Market, ITB Berlin, we can share the same space, but then the branding has to be separate. Because if we don't do that, both of us stand the risk of missing an opportunity in terms of engaging visitors. And I think that is something that we have recognized as clearly very, very important. But we have to collaborate on some broad areas. Our market in Tobago is very different, but that does not mean that we don't also have the opportunities for meetings and conventions. There's a small market that is very vibrant, and we need to be there as well. So there are very few opportunities where neither of us or any one of us should not be. In some larger jurisdictions, that example exists. I've seen Mexico attend trade shows, and you have Cancun, in one place, and you have another city, because these are unique areas within that one country. The USA does it every time we go to one of those major shows. You see Colorado, Las Vegas, and everybody else. They may end up taking a bigger space, but then the distinction of what makes them attractive, what makes people move, and what makes the economic business happen, that model is tried and tested and proven that you need separate branding, and sometimes you have to carve out your own niche, particular to what your business is.
Thank you. I have a general question, but before asking it, let me preface it this way. We, as a committee, our job, one of our tasks is to help you, to help state enterprises, and we can make recommendations. So a lot of talk now about the need for diversification, weaning off the energy sector. Tourism is vitally important in the diversification thrust. So my question is, are there any impediments that would mitigate or prevent a full flowering of our tourism sector? And if so, if you could identify them and make recommendations as to what can be done to develop the sector better.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm glad to hear that this committee would like to know how they can assist the tourism industry rather to work against it. I've had some experience in the industry, but to answer your question as to what is necessary to diversify the country away from the energy sector and into the tourism sector, I think the Trinidad and Tobago, its citizens, the members of the business community, has to look at it in a more holistic manner. You have to have full buy-in by all citizens that this industry can play a major role in contributing to our GDP and contributing to employment in Trinidad and Tobago. Having said that, we have outlined in the TTL the different areas in which we believe that Trinidad can become a center for the various genres that I mentioned, which are conferencing, and that is Trinidad needs a bigger conference center that can host perhaps events in excess of 3,000 to 4,000 people. For example, the energy conference, which recently took place at the Hyatt, it was bursting at its seams. You know, what is required is a bigger convention center, which can allow more arrivals and will redound to more occupancy levels in the hotels. What is also required is for Trinidad to increase the number of hotels and the amount of rooms that we have from 1,500 to say 4,000 to reach that critical mass, which will encourage more airlines to come into Trinidad. We also outlined the whole area of sport tourism. We have some excellent sporting facilities right here in Trinidad. The Couva Complex, we have one of the best cycling velodromes. We have one of the best swimming facilities in the country. We've been in conversations with Sport TT and the heads of all of the sporting organizations in Trinidad to see how we can encourage more sporting events to come to Trinidad. For example, the Hash, which is taking place in April of this year, will have 5,000 arrivals. There aren't enough rooms in Trinidad at the moment to fit everyone. So if we were to encourage perhaps 20 or 30 massive events, you will have full occupancy year-round. In addition to sporting, we spoke about events. Carnival is an example of that. We are seeing this particular event, Carnival, getting larger and larger. There's a 6% increase. We had a meeting last week with all of the hoteliers, the heads of the hotels, and they have indicated to us that Carnival was sold out since August of last year, and that next year we are already getting bookings, and they feel that it will sell out even before August for 2021. So there's so much that we have to offer. I just wanted to respond a little bit about the marketing and the difference between Tobago and Trinidad. Whilst it's important for us to attend collectively to events such as ITB or World Travel Market, which I have done in the past with your Secretary of Tourism, it's also important to understand that the people that they are meeting will be different to the people that we are meeting. They will meet tour operators and travel agents and people in the airline industry to work on subsidies on airlines. We will meet with conference planners, people who plan conventions. We will try to meet with sporting fraternities or people who intend to have, for example, training camps in Trinidad. And these are the people that we will want to talk to see how you can bring your team to Trinidad during the summer for training and to use some of our facilities. So it's important to differentiate the markets and to understand that we cannot be going to the same places at the same time always, other than the big events, because at those big events, all the players are there. But we will intend to focus more on such as convention and conferences, which are held yearly. We will tend to look at the sporting fraternity and then events and so on. So to answer your question, I think it is important that we have buy-in. Some investors have spoken to me and said, well, what are the incentives? I said, you don't even know we have a whole array of incentives under the TDA Act, accelerated depreciation, duty-free items on goods that are brought specifically for the hotel industry. We offer subsidies towards hotels that are rebuilding or revamping. And I think this information has to be made public. It has to be not made public, but for more people in the industry and the business community to understand that there are a lot of incentives and to understand that this industry can play a major role in contributing to GDP and for diversifying the economy.
Thank you. Dr. Roberts?
Thank you, Chair. I want to echo some of the sentiments that the chairman also articulated. Intersectoral support is key. I think the CEO spoke about the port facility. And recognizing that the port, I think traditionally we have had the port as a place for the offloading of cargo, and having domestic arrivals. But port facilities have gone way beyond what Trinidad and Tobago currently offers. They have become more sophisticated. The investment in port is not even handled so much by governments anymore. It's done by cruise lines, Royal Caribbean and so on. So to the extent that we can begin to change and shift our thinking about how these places operate, even airports. Airports are no longer places of transit. They're places for doing business, maximizing visitor spend. If you think about Singapore, Singapore is between the corner of east and west, and you would want transit through Singapore because it is an experience in itself. So even in building out, and I've seen a plan for the Tobago airport, even in building out the Tobago airport, we have to do it with a 22nd century mindset of what we want it to look like and not what it looked like in 1995. So that type of imagination is important, as well as the intersectoral support. We have issues related to the reef. The Buku Reef is a pristine area, or it used to be. You know, how do we police it? How do we ensure that it's kept conserved and preserved for future generations? So we want to be able to work with the people who monitor the reef properly. We want to be able to work with the players who protect the reef. At the moment, it is disparate, at the moment it's fragmented. So intersectoral support is key. Town planning. Destinations is a look and feel. We have a history in Trinidad and Tobago, and I know I'm being televised, of, you know, just putting things anywhere. If you are really building out a tourism destination, then your architecture and your look and feel has to be, we don't want cookie cutter. We want it to have a Trinidad and Tobago feel, but it has to be clean, it has to be neat, it has to be well preserved. So we need intersectoral buying. The second thing that we need is an investment climate that is very clear. When an investor comes to your country, they're one step, two step, three, the ease of doing business. I think that is really key. At the moment, all the different functions for an investor is rested in very different departments. Where do you find them, you know? So you want a folio. When we go out to investors, we say, these are the steps that you take. These are the people that you see to get, you know, your project up and running. Because, of course, again, competition is fierce. They will go to St. Kitts, they will go to Nevis, they will go to places that the ease of doing business is a lot better. For Tobago, product quality is key for us. We want a game changer. We have determined that the types of hotel plant that we are looking for would be a mix of all-inclusive, a mix of niche hotels, a mix of EP hotels. So we know what we are looking for, and the way that you're going to attract airline and the way that you would not have to pay them the subsidies is if you have the quality as well as the quantity of rooms to really support airlines travel. Because even though sometimes you can subsidize an airline, they would find it unproductive and unprofitable to fly to your destination, notwithstanding the airlift guarantee. So product quality, and again, that ties back into foreign direct investment. It doesn't have to be an investment of the government, because I think governments are moving away from ownership of hotels. But how do we get a private sector, local as well as foreign, to invest? Awareness of the importance of tourism as a serious socio-economic development tool is really key. How do we change the mindset and the psyche of Tobagonians, of Trinidadians, that this is a viable industry that you can work in and live and earn a livelihood and really elevate and enhance your quality of life. So service training that does not promote servitude, but service training that really locks into the natural friendliness of the Trinidad and Tobago psyche is really important. So we want something that resonates with our public, as well as to give our residents a sense that they are in it, and this can improve your quality of life. Because as our mandate is not just to drive arrivals and to drive spend, but it is enhance the quality of life of the average Tobagonian. They must say, yes, I see this in my hospital because there's oxygen. I see this in my schools because there's psychologists. I see how tourism is filtering through the economy of Trinidad and of Tobago and making a difference in my life. And of course, funding, the political, I remember Mark is smiling, notwithstanding we don't have an internal auditor. Yes, funding is really key. And to give some context to it, globally, when you look at destinations who determine that they are serious about tourism, they put not only the political will, but the funding in place to ensure that it happens. So if we take Dubai, if we take St. Kitts, if we take the Maldives, if we take Singapore, the governments that have articulated that tourism must be a powerful economic driver, they have also put the funding to ensure that this vision, this imagination is fulfilled. So we need to be funded because we are operating in the context of US dollars, of euros, of pounds for our TT dollars. So we cannot say it's 20 TT, that's a lot of money. 20 TT does not convert substantially when you're thinking about airline guarantees, when you're thinking about having representation in Scandinavia, in Germany, in the United States, in Canada. You have to be paying in foreign exchange. So you need to be in a position where we are funded to earn a foreign exchange that will drive future development. Thank you.
Well, on the funding, as you were talking, the Chinese have a saying that a rising tide raises all boats. I think people tend to look at funding and say, well, is this just funding your organization and money coming back only to you? But in reality, if we expend X amount of dollars, the returns are for all citizens and all industries across the board. What would you say you could anticipate would be like a rate of return on these investments? We put in this money forward, we give the funding.
All right.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if you look at the level of funding that is given to, say, a typical destination management company, and if I may use, in the case of Tobago, 20 million TT dollars. If we look at the number of arrivals that come into the destination, and I'll use a constrained comparison. Suppose we say we have nearly 20,000 persons spending 150 US dollars per day, an average length of stay of about 10. You get a number that is far greater than what would be the investment. And that is only looking at the international. We have not even counted the domestic, and we have not even counted that big black hole that we don't know, which is far greater than that 20. So it is not just positive, it is positive in its worst or in its most conservative depiction by a magnitude of, say, sometimes 100 or 200%. It's a very, very important metric. The thing about tourism, and sometimes we tend to underestimate its importance, is that there's nothing new that is happening in tourism. It's just a temporary expansion of your population. So to the extent that people come into your country, they travel, they buy things, they eat, it creates a great economic input. I just want to beg your indulgence for one additional one. We have looked at a number of islands within the Caribbean, and what we've seen is that no more than 10% of the overall population travels. Now, with 10% of the population traveling, and with the fact that you have each individual person who pays part of the airline fee as a landed commitment towards the Port Authority, there is absolutely no way that those national revenue could fund an airport. So to a large extent, that is a clear example that international visitor arrivals funds important infrastructure, and that is just looking at the port facilities. If we look at the insurance companies in some of the more developed tourism destinations, and you look at the extent to which insurance premiums are dependent on the tourism sector, it far outweighs the contribution made by the nationals. So these are the sort of important metrics that are sometimes not drawn together to see what a real rate of return is as it relates to an investment in the promotion. And like I mentioned earlier, it's about a level of funding and also the consistency that allows you to make proper decisions in the right time. And I think that makes the case for funding for tourism.
Thank you. Member Mark, you had a few questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Oh, my brother. Yes.
Apologies,
Yes,
Member Leons.
Thank you very much. I'll be short. Right. Just this session has been very informative, and it outlined a lot of the challenges that we have in the tourism sector. A lot of it has to do with collaboration with different agencies. I've listened to funding issues. And in terms of the measurement, being able to measure where you are, everybody would have indicated where they want to be. A lot of the information from measurement is or comes from some other agency, whether it be another ministry or another entity. What is the positive collaboration that is happening now, or is there challenges in having those collaborations? So, for example, I listened and I heard that you all would interface with the sport company. Sport tourism is important. The events, I would assume you would have Ministry of Culture being some form of collaboration. Is it something that is structured, possibly going into some form of policy? What is the level of collaboration and commitment to ensure that, one, information is coming in a particular way, in a right way? You have Bureau standards. How are we going to structure that to ensure that growth and that measurement is done in a scientific way?
Sure. So I think, again, you've touched on a very good point in terms of making sure that we are able to have not just the buy-in, because whenever you have that collaboration, it's not just, hey, we need this from you, but hey, how can we help support you? And even as we've mapped out stakeholders, they include everyone from National Trust to CSO. So whenever you look at data capture and collection, we have had multiple meetings with CSO. So one of the ways that we capture data, as Mr. Lewis was alluding to, visitor expenditure, in terms of hard data, we would be working with them to make sure that we're doing the exit surveys at the airport, so that you are doing some real-time capture of visitors who are leaving. And so there's a lot of inputs. So from immigration to CSO, even the central bank works with CSO for some of those exit surveys and so forth. We also do some of our own primary capture. So for example, at the cruise ship complex, we are conducting, and this is led by one of our research officers, an exit survey of people leaving the cruise ship complex. So there's both primary data capture, there's data capture in collaboration with other agencies, and then some of the other ones that you highlighted on, from culture to sport to so forth, those would be how can we collaborate more effectively with the with the destination to ensure that everybody is bought in. And that we have, because I would say, and I would echo what both chairmen shared, in terms of that paradigm shift that has to take place to really understand the importance and role that tourism has to play in the overall development of the nation. Because one other metric that I would highlight, in addition to what was shared, and whenever you think about ROI, is employment. So right now, from an employment standpoint, and this is to date, employment accounts for, in the tourism sector, 1 in 10 persons is employed either directly or indirectly through the tourism sector. So that's 10% of current jobs can be attributable to tourism. And I think that's a really important measurement that we also have to look at. Again, whenever you look at the overall development, not just of the sector, but of the country, it's something that we have to pay close attention to. And then other stakeholders that would be involved, again, not just from the infrastructure standpoint, but from the visitor experience and so forth, would be ranging from TTPS and Ministry of Health and all the other agencies that touch visitors and touch the experience that they have on the ground here. So that is where a large portion of our job and responsibility comes in, is to make sure that there is that conversation happening.
One of the major point that stood out was the level of infrastructure that is required to support both your objectives. For example, port development, conference rooms and hotels and stuff. Now, I know we would have had a collaboration with private investors, probably trying to get hotels and stuff. And the chairman spoke about cruise liners actually being part of some form of investment for development of port. Are there any such discussions happening for development for port development or for conference spaces, for hotels within the private sector industry?
I'll just touch on one, and then I'll hand over to you guys for the ones raised for there. But in terms of the convention center, so currently UDECOT is leading a discussion in terms of the feasibility of establishing a convention center. So that's an example for some discussions and leadership from UDECOT on that aspect in terms of establishing there, and they have our full support. We've been involved in a number of consultations with them. So there is ongoing discussion as it pertains to the convention center.
I am aware that there are some initial talks that the Chief Secretary is having with some port personnel. I'm not sure where those talks are or, what the outcome is. What to me is most concerning is that talks around foreign direct investment, they have to have a clear institution so that we would know how to direct potential investors. At the moment, within the Trinidad and Tobago Unitary State and the THA's framework, there's a lack of clarity in terms of who drives foreign direct investment. And once that is clarified, I think it would make our job a lot easier. When we approached, how do we direct the potential investor?
Would not be some form of collaboration between trade and yourself, no?
Right, so I'm trying to get away from the vagueness. So, the trade, it needs to be clarified. Who is driving foreign direct investment? And what are the steps for that investor? Because investors, you appreciate very, time is money for them. And of course, you don't want them to go to another. So ease of doing business has always been the cry when it comes to FDI in Trinidad and Tobago, and dare I say other jurisdictions. So clarity is what is required at this point if we are to achieve our mandate within the time frame.
Okay. Chair, through you, I would like to ask for some of the information that was shared in terms of the challenges, the clarity, some of the collaborations that may or may not be structured. If we can get that from both entities so that we can include that in our report, please. Thank you.
Thank you. So if you could provide that to us, we'd be very appreciative.
I just wanted to add that in terms of collaborations, we collaborate with InvestTT, who deal with foreign investors looking for possible opportunities in Trinidad. And in fact, they have outlined certain investments in the hotel industry by foreign investors, for which I can't talk publicly about as yet, in the airport area. And if that comes to pass, that should add another conference center and some more rooms to our stock.
Yeah, thank you very much.
As Ms. Alert was talking about the ways in which tourism would impact growth and development in Trinidad, I wanted to share, it could also impact manufacturing, because there's a dearth of souvenirs, Trinidad products, when visitors come to be able to take away. I remember years ago, the first time I visited China, I took Trinidadian products to give us gifts. And at the end of my tour, I gave our tour director a Trinidad and Tobago cap, because it had all the flag, And when he opened it up, it said, "Made in China," to my great chagrin. So we really could do a lot more in terms of promoting a lot of our figurines, our carnival products, that sort of thing, postcards, art. And I also made a suggestion many years ago about national treasures, because tourism could also be a way in which we could enhance and foster those that are dearest to us. In Japan, they have these national treasures. These are the living tradition bearers, whether it is sword making, ikebana, things like that. Now, could you imagine that when visitors come, they could go to a place where they could see somebody making pan tuning, wire bending, traditional arts and craft. These living treasures would have a stipend. They could help keep the traditions alive by having apprentices, and all at the same time, people seeing and sharing in that experience. It could be a real virtuous cycle. So just a suggestion. Member Mark.
Mr. Chairman, we all recognize that releases, lack of funding, given what we have been told, appear to be a major challenge facing both agencies in Trinidad as well as in Tobago. I would like to ask both the Ministry of Tourism, Permanent Secretary, as well as the Investments Division, the reasons for this development, as well as what can be done or what can we do in order to ensure that these agencies have the necessary funding in an effort to implement their strategic plans. I think it's very important that we try to understand what is causing that situation so that we, on our side, can put forward appropriate recommendations, both the Ministry of Tourism and Investment.
Well, I think that the country is very much aware of the economic constraints that we are experiencing, and in such a scenario, there will always be strong competition from various ministries and sectors for the limited resources. So tourism, just like other sectors, will have to make very strong business cases in its submissions to the Ministry of Planning as well as to the Ministry of Finance regarding the viability of its proposals. So I think that is one thing. As the resources have come on at Tourism Trinidad Limited, I think there's an enhanced ability to strengthen those project proposals that will be coming forward this year to the Ministry of Finance. Also, as the resources are in place, there will be an enhanced credibility in terms of the ability to actually implement, because those are two factors that both Ministry of Planning and Development as well as Ministry of Finance would look at. And secondly, there has been a learning curve with respect to, even after we get the funding, the submission of documentation for the release of funds. And the ministry has been collaborating very closely with our agency with respect to ensuring that there is understanding amongst the various parties, that is two stakeholder ministries, Planning and Development, Finance, this ministry, the Ministry of Tourism, and the agency as to what is exactly required in order to have a smooth release of funds when we require them. I think it's also important that the planning for those projects take place very early on so that those documents get to the Ministry of Finance early. So we are working with the TTL on that. And I'm happy to say that we have received a significant release over the past few weeks, which will be sent across to our company within the next week or so.
And Mrs. Lachman?
I'd like to concur with my colleague, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Tourism, on his comments. I can only speak for TTL at the moment. That company would have gotten, I believe, $3 million in 2018, around $8 million in 2019, and for 2020 fiscal, $10 million. So therefore, given the budgetary constraints, there are still increases. And I know that their staff will increase in the near future, so I suppose it will go to staffing as well.
May I ask Dr. Roberts to provide to this committee some timelines for the engagement of 3 things? And we'll be following up. The engagement of an external auditor, we want a timeline. The engagement of an internal auditor to establish that internal audit function. And there's something called your annual performance review, an appraisal report. Can you provide this committee with some deadlines or timelines when these matters would be addressed?
My apologies. Thank you, member, for the external auditor. The recommendation comes to the board in February, so March 2020. Internal auditor, March 2020. And the annual performance review, we had agreed March 2020.
You're aware of something called administrative reports that you are supposed to submit to the President of the Republic every year? Are you aware of this?
I am aware, but it's a ministerial, the reading of it says the ministry sends to the president. It doesn't take account of the architecture of the Tobago House of Assembly. So my report goes to the Secretary for Tourism, and then I suspect it's collated and everything is sent to the ministry or the president.
But have you been doing this?
I certainly have.
So you have submitted reports?
I have, sir.
The question is the mechanism for transmission.
Certainly.
That is something, Mr. Chairman, we need to look into. May I ask a question directly to the chairman? Given all the challenges that you are faced with, you are there for about 3 years roughly. I don't know what it was before. You can probably tell us. Is Tobago Tourism having regard to this agency that has been formed? Would you want to tell us whether you are worse off today than you were before the formation of this autonomous agency, or would you say that you are better off?
But that is a very subjective question.
Okay. All right.
That is a very subjective question. How do I answer it?
All right, you don't have to. If you want to try, I'll appreciate that.
I would say that given the establishment of the agency, that there is greater clarity on the direction of tourism in Tobago. What was not clear before is who should be our target market. We have clarified that. So when we are looking at our funding, we are not going after every single person on earth. We are going after these specific niches: cultural heritage, eco, adventure, wellness, romance. To that extent, we are then able to utilize the funds that we receive much more efficiently, because we know where to find them, we know how they spend, how they travel, how long they stay. We know a lot about the niches that we are going after. So there is greater clarity there. We also have very specific objectives in terms of arrivals and spend. I have seen no document prior to now that has clearly articulated that type of clarity in terms of outcomes. Tobago traditionally has gone after the Scandinavian, the UK, the German market. We've had representatives in those markets. The effectiveness of those representatives could be questionable. We have these persons in our markets with very clear deliverables, and we are holding them to account. So is it better off? There is greater clarity, I would say.
Yeah. Do you think, and Mr. Chairman, through you, do you think, Madam Chairman, as well as Mr. Howard Chinley, do you think that there's a pressing need to have a formal liaison committee established so that there would be better coordination, synchronization, harmonization between the agencies responsible for tourism, which would incorporate, as you were saying earlier, a representative or representation from immigration, from customs, from the Port Authority, from the TTPS as examples. Do you think that there is a need for such a mechanism to be urgently considered by both the chairman of the local tourism company here, as well as your good self in Tobago? I just want to put that and get your response.
Oh, we have actually done that, member. We have established, or we have sent a proposal to the Executive Council for the establishment of a Tobago Tourism Council. The idea of it is an intersectoral committee constituting immigration, police, Port Authority, infrastructure and services, education, health, and all of those key players that would make things happen in Destination Tobago. So the notice with the Executive Council for approval, and the Chief Secretary has agreed to chair that council. So we're just waiting on the approval from the Executive Council.
And what is the role of I know that Tobago Council will take into account those elements, but in terms of the collaboration, as you mentioned earlier, I think Mr. Lewis made the point that when tourists or persons who may visit here and then they want to come to Tobago, there's no way of recording and measuring that those persons who are coming. So I'm wondering, is there an attempt to have a Trinidad and Tobago Council where you'll have this collaboration on that level? So I'll ask Mr. Howard Chinley, what is his thought on this matter?
History repeats itself. I think the chairman opened by talking about this agency once called the Tourism Industrial Development Corporation, which was exactly what was meant to have happened, which was to bring together the Industrial Development Corporation together with the Tourism Development Association and the Export Development Company to come under one roof, to collaborate in recognizing that tourism is not just about marketing, but it requires investment. The chairman spoke about manufacturing. You also could mention agriculture in that, because people need to eat when they arrive on the island. So many industries are spawned from that member mark. However, and just going back again, I also sat on the Tourism Steering Committee, which I think you might be too young to remember. But at that committee sat the Chief Secretary, the Minister of Tourism in Trinidad, the Secretary of Tourism in Tobago, the Police Commissioner, the Police in Tobago, I mean, all of the entities. And it worked well for a while, but like any other collaboration, Member Mark, one has to be very careful not to get too much into talk, or get into analysis paralysis. You just talk. I think at this stage in our tourism, we ought to focus on what we're doing now, which basically is to focusing on our marketing, identify our niches, talk directly to stakeholders that matter to Trinidad and stakeholders that matter to Tobago. So in terms of collaboration, we continue to collaborate. In fact, the CEO will tell you we've met with the TTPS, we've had meetings with the Immigration Department many times. We sit and have meetings with InvestTT very often, so much so that they want to sign a memorandum of understanding between the two entities with regard to investment. And we've met all different associations, and we continue to do that as we further develop the industry. I'm not sure if it is needed at this point in time to have this overarching entity, such as TIDCO or such as the Tourism Steering Committee, but rather to have two entities that understand what their mandate and their roles are. These entities clearly defined with pinpoint accuracy who their markets are, who their niches are, and to focus in that direction and to seek assistance from these agencies when needed.
May I, Mr. Chairman, ask Mrs. Allett? I saw where your tourism agency or body was allocated about $23.1 million on the sites and attractions upgrade, or maybe the ministry was allocated that. I wanted to get, for instance, if a status report on the following projects insofar as the upgrading of these projects are concerned. Las Cuevas Beach, Parmin Lookout, Manzanilla Beach Facility, Blue Basin and Diego Martin Water, Wheel, Lopino, Temple in the Sea, Carney Sanctuary, Restoration Project, and the Coral River. Could you share with us, give us an update briefly, and then in writing on these projects?
The sites and attractions that you reference is currently with Ministry of Tourism. So I'll defer to Ministry of Tourism.
Good. And I would like to ask whether this information can be provided in writing subsequently. But I can say that the Las Cuevas Beach project is ongoing. There are 5 sites that are directly under the Ministry of Public Administration the Ministry of Tourism, and we continue to do work over the course of years on those sites. The Maracas Beach site, for example, which is entering into phase 2 of its implementation upgrade. The Las Cuevas Beach site, we recently did a number of upgrade works to the restaurant, as well as the parking lot. We developed a walkway to the parking lot, and we did some work on the sewage treatment facility there. The Paramin project is ongoing. We recently put out Section 3 and Section 4 notices for the acquisition of small plots of land at the Paramin site, where we'll be constructing a lookout during the course of this year into the next fiscal. Hopefully it will be completed in this fiscal year.
How about the Carney Bird Sanctuary site? What is the status of that?
So it's not currently a project. I mean, it is on our agenda to look at as a possibility, but with the funding that we have at this time, it is not directly to be implemented in this fiscal year, unless funding is provided, and until we can develop a specific project that might be applicable there.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask?
But there are sites that we have identified. I mean, there are probably hundreds of sites around the country, and those that you have called out, Lupino Temple in the Sea, as well as the Caroni Bird Sanctuary sites, are projects that that are in the pipeline as possibilities. But the specifics I can't give you at this time.
Could you tell us whether your ministry has engaged agencies as it relates to these recently renovated historical buildings? Have you looked at developing any plan for their inclusion in the tourism product? Is there any effort to look at those things at all? These historical sites and buildings.
Sure. So that definitely with respect to the cruise ship visits, my team is in constant interaction with the tour operators as well as the National Trust regarding regarding tours to some of those historical sites as to whether there's specific discussions with respect to those new those buildings that have most recently been upgraded. I can't say. There's nothing that I've heard of to date.
But do you intend to
Certainly,
explore?
certainly, because one of the attractions of this destination is its unique architecture. So as those vessels come down the islands, many of the cruise ship visitors say that the experience of walking through Port of Spain is an experience that they can't get in most of those other destinations. And they talk about the pleasure that they get with respect to visiting those buildings that we take for granted sometimes in and around the Port of Spain area, including the cemeteries, by the way.
I was going to say that because our cemeteries and our squares, I mean, buildings are important. You can't imagine an India without the Taj Mahal, or France without Eiffel Tower and Notre Dame, or Barcelona without Gaudi's Cathedral. So those buildings and our historical sites are critical. And I would like to also add the Red House. Do you have any plans for the Red House in terms of tourism product?
Yes, but those plans will have to be discussed again with the Parliament, as well as those who manage this building, as well as the tour operators and the other stakeholders.
Well, I think we've had a very...
I noticed Member Mark decided not to talk about the Maracas Beach because I just wanted to add that in talking with some of the tour operators, for the cruise ships, I've asked them which is the most requested site that these cruise arrivals would like to visit, and most of them says Maracas Beach. And I had the opportunity to actually visit the beach whilst one of the cruise ships was in port recently, and the beach was rather full. And I was quite impressed to see the facilities that exist at Maracas Beach in terms of the new parking area, the areas where it's vending, you don't have to cross the road anymore, it's right in front of you, and that they don't allow parking any longer on the beach side. All the parking is on the other side, so it gives it much more room and much more space. I think the word is capacious, it's open, it's much more environmentally friendly, and for all intents and purposes, the experience was a very positive one for all the visitors to that renewed facility.
And I'll add that in this fiscal, we'll be further upgrading the facilities up there. Again, I've been getting positive feedback from people in the general population with respect to the work that has been done. So we've overcome some of the challenges that we had, especially in the early part of 2019. But again, we will be adding additional vendor huts, as well as upgrading some of the parking area and adding additional washrooms, as well as upgrading the lifeguard building.
Thank you. Well, this has been very informative. I'm now going to invite closing remarks from officials of Tourism Trinidad Limited, Tobago Tourism Agency, Ministry of Tourism, and the Division of Tourism, Culture, Transportation, Tobago House of Assembly, and of course, Ministry of Finance Investments Division.
Well, I'll go first. I simply want to say that the Ministry of Tourism thanks you for the opportunity to participate in this inquiry, and of course, we look forward to receiving your recommendations. We will continue to work together with all respective stakeholders and companies to achieve our goals and for the development and growth of the tourism sector. Thank you.
From the Tobago Tourism Agency, we would like to thank you for the opportunity for us to ventilate what we think are some of the major challenges that we have to face with. I think it's very important for this dialogue from practitioners and members like yourself who are the policy administrators to understand the ambition that we have set ourselves or has been set for us. So we are very thankful for this opportunity, and we note carefully that you've made some specific requests from us, which we will ensure that you have in a timely fashion. Thank you very much.
All right, from Tourism Trinidad, again reiterating the thanks and appreciation to be able to have this dialogue. I think it's a very important one to have, and to have that shift in awareness and appreciation for what tourism brings to the nation, and where we want to be heading, and where we are heading. You know, because I go back to that first word that we spoke in terms of momentum, and ensuring that we're able to continue to build on the successes that we saw, especially in 2019, and really build on that and see even more and greater things in 2020 and beyond.
Yeah, I would like to also thank the committee chairman for reminding us that we work for the state, and that all that we do, we have to account for all of our actions. And I always tend to remind the board of that this is not a private organization, this belongs to the government. And the fact that we don't have many questions from Waitmark, I feel very confident with my executive and my CEO that they've been doing a remarkable job. So thank you all for this hearing.
The division is also grateful for the opportunity afforded to us to share information, and at the same time identifying our weaknesses in the operations. We are committed to making the necessary corrections as we strive to fulfill our mandate.
The Ministry of Finance Investment Division also would like to thank the committee for having us here to have any input that you would have asked of, and also to assist in the strengthening of state agencies. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for attending. You're now excused, and I would like to also thank the viewing and listening audience. Good day. This meeting is now suspended.